All right, so we are July 25th. It's a Wednesday. We used to do the sprint demos on the Fridays, but we changed the date a bit earlier so we can use the demo as a feedback for the sprint planning. The sprint actually ends on Friday. There's no change in that. Next sprint starts on Monday. This is the end of the sprint number 8. Last time we decided to still go after a bug hunting party and fixing as we are working together like a stable release. We had this plan about doing a follow-up on Istio 1.0 changes. At the time, we didn't know how much changes to expect really, but that happens to be pretty large changes, and we are not done with that. Some productization tasks, which are like Red Hat internal stuff. Some work for SSL support, some UXD changes, but we didn't want to break everything neither. So sometimes just to make things more consistent with Patternfly, do some promotion work, some issues with IT to get our website properly set up, but still working on that. Logo, progress, but some progress. And then we talked about the release procedure. Let's see if we can make this release happen. We want to do a release after each sprint, so after every 3 weeks. A few research spikes as well. I can start an update on the website if you want. If you go on Kiali.io, you'll have a certificate issue. I accepted it, but I'm still waiting on IT to make the necessary changes. But it will look like that once you can already access it. But there's the old one as well, .org. We have a feature page that started. Oh, actually, it's not there yet. Yeah, it's here. It was in my cache. So the plans here was to add more features. So those are like very large features. Initially, didn't envision explain very large concepts, but for not large concepts. And the two here are attached with a video, so you get. That's not the right one. But here, yes. Anyway, yeah, I guess there's a bug here. Anyway, still working on this one in parallel, working with IT to get that up and running. All right, so now Jay, you can start then maybe Xavier and then Shuka to end the sprint demo.
Okay. So we do these sprint demos by sort of sub team. This is the Saturn team. As Thomas was saying, that the big focus of this sprint, or one of the big focuses, is a version of Kiali that's compatible with version 1.0 of Istio. And there are some significant changes between Istio 0.8 and 1.0, and we've been doing a lot of work to catch up with those changes. And there's really not that much to show for this particular demo, other than the fact that we do have something up and running on the graph side, which is a lot of what the Saturn team does. If I go to the About box, you can see that the Istio version is release 1.0. It's a daily build from a couple days ago. But we do have up and running a graph against 1.0, and you can notice up in the top corner here that we've renamed service graph to graph, because actually in 1.0 the focus is not on services in the graph. the telemetry that we generate the graph from is actually focused more appropriately now either on apps or workloads. And we have graphs that sort of reflect both of those things. So today, in this graph, what you're seeing is something very much like, if not exactly like what you've seen in the past demos. It is an app graph where every node in the graph represents something labeled with a particular app and version label. So when we look at product page V1, product page is your app, V1 is the version of that. We still have version grouping for the reviews app in this case with 3 different versions, which is basically like backed by the 3 different deployments of that service. One thing that we're adding as we go forward are different types of graphs. So if you look up in the URL, we now see a graph type of app. And in this case, it's versioned, which is why we've got this grouping around versions and so forth. It's split out. I can actually change this to version equal false. We'll let it recalculate. It's a little bit slow with the presentation and everything running. And you can see this difference where the versions have now been compressed. So you've got a true sort of app aggregated view of the graph, where instead of seeing different versions here, all the versions of reviews, for example, are going to be combined into one. It gives you a more of a streamlined topology to look at. Past that, as I mentioned before, you can also look at the workloads in a workload graph. So in this case, instead of each node in the graph representing an app or an app plus version, each one of these nodes represents the workload, which is roughly equivalent to a deployment that's actually got traffic going. So in reality, when we're sending requests in Istio, it's going from workload to workload. And so what this is showing is that product page V1, you'll notice this is actually the workload name, which is in fact the deployment name in this case. Requests are flowing from this workload to this workload, whereas a workload underneath this are the workload instances, which are the pods itself, but it's aggregated up to the workload view. So that's the main thing that we wanted to show here, is that in V1.0 of Istio, things have changed so that the telemetry is not really service-based. It is workload-based, and it can also be app-based if you provide the app and version labeling. And we're going to have graphs that represent those different views, so you can change around to see things in a way that you want to see it. Also, in this version, or in this sprint, as Thomas mentioned, our team worked on productization tasks. So that's in progress. And also, we did a research spike into multi-tenancy support, which I believe is summarized in Kiali, in the Jira Kiali 964. So if you want to take a look at what that result is or what's in progress in the thinking there, check out that Jira. And that's what I have for Saturn team. Any questions?
Yeah, is there any, so I see there that there's the option to like refresh it at a certain interval. Is there any way to just request a cached version of the graph?
Not currently, although that idea has been kicked around. One thing we'd like to be able to do is provide the backing JSON for the graph you're looking at. And if you had the JSON, you could basically recreate a graph using that JSON. So I think that's probably going to be happening, although I don't think there's a Jira for it just yet. Is that what you were asking about?
No, actually, because
okay.
I'm thinking through it from the perspective of just with the amount of time that it took to calculate the graph when you were switching from the versioned to unversioned.
Okay. Yeah.
It's introducing latency there that for some users, they don't actually need the most current version of the data. They actually just need the UI to not be kind of dragging along.
Okay, I got what you're saying. I mean, yeah, so it's possible that we could do that. We don't do it now. And again, I don't think there's a cure for that, but having cached versions of the graph, which you could just jump between quickly. I mean, we do, if you change layout, for example, that's kind of quick over here.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, I should mention that we actually, one last thing we did here was we narrowed down the number of layouts we have. In this sprint, we decided to get rid of breadth first and clay, as breadth first was sort of redundant with Dagray, and clay just never really looked very good. So we are narrowing. We're trying to simplify and narrow the thing. But if you jump between different layouts, that happens very quickly because it's all client side. And what you're saying is, well, could we jump between different graph types in the same sort of fashion? And that's probably possible. So, we could even async, pull them, and do it in the background so you get it quickly.
So I'm also thinking about the different. Since ultimately everything is coming from etcd, and I'm actually thinking about how etcd is working in the background. There is ultimately going to be a versioning on the actual resources that it's doing the calculations on. And so if you've already done the calculation on a specific version of the resource, there's no reason to calculate it again, because by the very nature of how the different pods and everything are being cycled, if there hasn't been a change, then the API server hasn't detected it and wouldn't have actually kind of changed the DAG at all. Well, so
we should
no, go ahead.
Go ahead, Heiko.
To hook into the Kubernetes event system where we learn about new pods, new versions, and all these things. So on startup, we compute the graphs, and then just listen for these events and update it with the in-memory model.
But just a comment that a lot of the graph is actually generated from the Prometheus metrics and is not coming from the Kubernetes objects themselves. We do use Kubernetes objects for some of it, but most of it's coming from Prometheus.
Okay. And I guess the last thing, there's two things I would say. One is we understand that there's a variety of performance optimizations that we can do. And performance has not been our forefront concern just yet, especially as we try to get 1.0 compatibility. But I will say that we're moving, I think, in that direction, because that we want that user experience to be as good as possible. We want it to be snappy. The other thing I would say is that we are moving in that direction in the background. We do keep a graph, in memory, which we sort of decorate on updates. So even though we've got this moving window of time, unless you pause your refresh like I just did, but most people are going to probably want it to continually update when you're using it for real. We are trying to maintain a base model of the graph and then decorate it with new metric information and so forth. So it's not a complete refresh each time, but the basic response, I think, to your concerns here is that yes, it could be snappier, and we are going to work in that direction.
All right. So we'll move on. Another thing, as Matt said in the chat, but it's not going to be in a recording. Not expecting people to craft the URL by hand, but we're still playing around for the Istio 1.0 concepts. Yes,
You know,
now,
I'm so sorry, Thomas. I guess that'd be the last comment. If there's something you didn't see in this graph that you saw in the past, like badging or whatever, it's because we're still in progress and we don't have everything implemented yet against 1.0.
okay. Xavier, are you ready?
Yes, yes, start sharing.
Yeah.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, in Jupyter's team, we've been working on 4 lines of work: UX improvement, bug fixing, research, mainly on this Istio 1.0 you mentioned before, and also documentation and performing. Starting from the UX improvements, we've been working on moving all the information we had in virtual service stuff for a single service. Instead of having all the information right here, we move it on this table, and then having like the details of each virtual service in a different page. So here we have a table with the statuses that it should be really easy to the user to see which one needs an eye. And here we have the 2 links to this separate page with all the information, and we can decor and add more details for each virtual service with warnings and so on. And then we have this the YAML. Previously, we have it like in a link, really hidden link on the previous page, but now we have it here. Also, we've been playing with the breadcrumb. We upgraded a little bit. I think there's like more work on UX side to improve this part, but now we are using pattern frame components for that, the breadcrumb component, if I'm not wrong. So we have that going here, also coming back to service info. And for example, if you go into metrics, then clicking here is going back here. Yeah, I think it's a kind of tuned and fully behavior breadcrumb, because also keeps the namespace of the service itself if you want clicking here, or if you don't want to preserve the namespace, then you have the other click here. Yeah, moving to the Istio config page, we work on showing properly the icons here. Before we only showed the valid and not valid icons, but now we have the warning icons here. And also we move how we show the rules. For example, if you see this one here, the rule, we can see now that we have this is a page for the rule, and then we have this table with all the instances. Okay, and yeah, we are going to a page showing the YAML information, same for the rule itself here. Also, as you can see, we've been we followed consistently with breadcrumbs, going back to the list and showing filter by rule and namespace, or only filtering by namespaces, or without any filter, as it should be. Yeah, and connected to bug fixing, we've been different things. And yeah, one last thing is, as you mentioned, Thomas, we've been working also in promoting, so we add this feature in website. I think those are the main things we've been working on. Yep. Do you have any
Thanks.
question?
Okay, let's continue with Yuka, and if we have more time for questions, we can use additional time.
Okay. Super.
Okay, so hopefully you're seeing my ID.
Yes.
Good. So yeah, what I have for this sprint is mostly around integration with Wildfly. So that applications being deployed on Wildfly would get tracing information then collected automatically. Right, so very similar to what we have for servlets, JAX-RS, and CDI on the Open Tracing Contrib, but without requiring the project to include any dependency. Right? So this is a Gradle build file for a tester project, and the only dependency I have is on the Java EE APIs. And I have here Wildfly source code with the extension that I'm building. And yeah, so let me start Wildfly, and it will also deploy this tester application. And hopefully it will work. So this is not the final code because I'm currently having a CDI problem, but I did have a version before that worked, and so that's what I'm training. So this is again, this is the application, a very simple, regular Java EE application being deployed on Wildfly, and whenever it's deployed, we assign a tracer, a Jaeger tracer, to this deployment, and we also add transparently some open tracing dependencies. Basically, the small RAI dependencies, which bring some open tracing contrib dependencies as well. So small RAI is the reference implementation for a micro profile. If I select Jaeger, and if I run a curl to end, then for that application that knows nothing about open tracing or Jaeger, I have here one trace created. Right, and we collect some span. So this one will not exist on the final version, and name of the operations will probably be different, but the idea is this one. So for an application that has no idea about tracing or open tracing or Jaeger at all, just being deployed on Wildfly would be sufficient to turn on the tracing for that. Yeah, so that's pretty much it.
All right, cool. That means later we can more easily add us or other teams add tracing into Wildfly or layered project or product on top of Wildfly.
Yeah, so this is done at the base level. So at the base Wildfly should be what on Wildfly 14 or perhaps 15. And every project consuming or based on those versions would get tracing. I like to think for free, but realistically, a little effort.
It's the minimum support, and there will be some latency before projects are on top of that version of Wildfly, but anyway. All right. I guess I'll stop the recording. Thanks everyone. We still have
working on Node similarly.
What's that?
Do we have anybody working on Node.js in a similar way where like the app doesn't need to know about it and our node that we provide sort of automatically handles picking up the traces?
I think there is someone from the Node team on the raw side looking into this right now. They may ask Pavel for some help, but I think they are looking into it.
Okay, that's good to know. Just as a heads up, I'm Well, I guess for folks who don't know, I'm actually the product manager for Istio. And as a part of the early access program, we're shaking the tree trying to find some users who will be referenceable for being able to utilize all of the components that everybody is building with OpenShift and specifically with Node.js so that we start kind of broadening the scope of what we're testing and what we're looking at and feedback from users. So.
I have some comments to Node.js. Node.js is a little bit more complicated and you have to do tracing basically manually. It means there is no like very simple integration which you can pull in and you will get tracing for your, for example, HTTP stack.
That is good to know. We'll look into that.
Yeah, and then I guess the other ones would be all the non-ROR stuff that's still really popular workload-wise. So there's a lot of Python in the data sciences world, and so Red Hat sorta kinda supports Python well. And then obviously Go. I shouldn't say obviously. Go is getting really popular. I'm assuming Go is well supported just because Jaeger's already Go, but those are just other things for us to keep in the back of our mind. And then Brian, you and I might want to connect with, or I should say, what do you think about connecting with Grant's advocacy team? Because I don't know how many of them are focused on doing anything with Istio or Kiali right now. A lot of that's being driven out of the DevTools, Dev, whatever organization, guys like Bursutter, Kamesh, etc. But I don't know where the advocacy and evangelism team is at yet.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Stop the recording. So next one it will be in 3 weeks because we have 3 week sprints. And if you think there are things that are important and critical enough for the next sprint, please raise that as early as possible. The best place is to do it directly in Jira, Kiali project, or in a tracing project if it's really related to the latest demo. And if you just have ideas for later, just put them as well so that we keep track of those new ideas. Thanks, everyone.